This is a webinar on shame and shame resilience. So you are the brave and courageous souls who are showing up for that. Because shame, as we will be talking about, is the hardest of our human emotions. So in showing up today, you're taking a brave step for yourself and for your clients. And a little bit about me, and we'll get into a little bit more in a little bit. I finished up with IPEC sometime in the end of 2018. I had a long, varied career. I grew up, the accent, if you're wondering, is South African. I grew up in South Africa. I served as a diplomat for 8 years, actually under Nelson Mandela's administration, and I spent 6 of those years in the Middle East. And then I came to the US to do an MBA at Cornell University, and then I followed the very traditional investment banking, Big Four consulting firm. I was in hospitality and real estate and finance, and by some circuitous routes, I landed up with our local energy utility, our local electric utility, working on innovation and energy efficiency and the energy of the future. And let's just say that was not the best decision I ever made. And it is actually what led me to becoming a coach. So, and we'll be talking just a little bit about that, but this is primarily focused on giving you some information and skills, and not so much about my story. First, a question. How many of you know of Brené Brown's work? Just put that into the chat. So, just about everyone. Great. So, many of the concepts I'm going to be talking about today will be quite familiar to you. I'm definitely a Brené Brown girl. That said, this webinar is not just a recap of Brené Brown's work. We'll also be exploring the neurobiology of shame. Yes, I actually said that in a coaching training session. Fear not, we will keep it simple. And the research and what the research around self-compassion is teaching us about shame and how to develop shame resilience. As an FYI, I am also a certified community resilience model teacher, which is a trauma-informed and resilience-informed modality, and teaches some very specific skills. So I'll actually be bringing some of those foundational concepts of resilience into this training from that model too. We're coaches, and we love to ask questions. So let's start with some. Why are you here? What do you want to learn today? Why did you show up for a webinar on shame and shame resilience? Just put that into the chat. Love the curiosity. Wonderful. Awesome. So I just see how much, the desire is there to learn for ourselves and to be able to support our clients more. So with that, how would you define shame? When you think of the word shame, how would you define that? Just put that into the chat box as well. Embarrassment, okay, interesting. Yeah, Greg, related, and we'll explain the difference between shame and embarrassment. Anyone else? We said, lots of people said they were Brené Brown people. Yep, it's associated with some really difficult emotions. We don't want to talk about it. Yeah, talking about shame is really hard. Very much so. So some great awareness there. Then the last question before we dive into some concepts. When shame shows up for you and your clients, what happens? Shut down, retreat, tears, sadness, yeah. Shame really can hollow us out, avoidance and anxiety. Yeah, indeed, whether we are owning it or avoiding it, depends a lot on what happens. Thank you for sharing that, because exactly what your answers are showing is how shame is such a deep and vulnerable and painful emotion for us. And when it shows up, it has some really big impacts and consequences in our lives. And so that's precisely why I do this webinar, because shame is the #1 thing that will kill confidence and resilience when it shows up. And shame can take any of us down. And I truly mean any of us, no matter where we lead with our energy levels. If we don't recognize shame when it shows up and have the skills to deal with it and make mistake, it can and does show up in energy level, in any energy level, and we'll get to that. It can take us down, no matter how brave or bold or confident we might otherwise be. And shame can also take us down in a coaching relationship when it shows up. Why? Because shame is a highly contagious emotion. When shame shows up in others, if we haven't done our own work, it can really trigger shame in us. And then when we add in our own discomfort around shame, we can unwittingly try to avoid dealing with it when it shows up in our clients, and thus reinforce their own shame for, as some of you have already said, it really thrives on secrecy and on silence. So at this point, let me tell you a little bit more about me. This is a photo of me taken in November 2017. When you look at this photo, what do you see? I'm not looking for compliments here, although they'll be fine, of course, but really read my body language, use your coaching skills, read my body language and my energy. What does it tell you about my energy level and what I'm feeling and thinking? Yeah, me, I talk a lot with my eyes shut. Ooh, I'm hiding something. Okay. This is interesting because actually when I looked, I'm not happy with something. Oh, this is how interesting, because actually at this moment when this photo was snapped, I was experiencing profound joy. So how interesting how we all read it a little differently. That's really fascinating. So there I was in this photograph, experiencing some pretty profound joy and feeling really comfortable and free and happy. So it might, or maybe not given your comments, it might come as a bit of a surprise to learn that this photo was taken just 2 months after I had admitted myself to hospital, pretty desperate to end the emotional pain I was in from the devastation shame had caused in my life. And I'll spare you the details, really, we don't need them. The most salient facts for the purposes of this webinar are that I had been subjected to such a devastating, shaming and bullying attack earlier in the year that it actually triggered PTSD in me. And I collapsed completely. And the really interesting thing is I'd been working with a truly wonderful coach for over 1.5 years at that point. And as she would have said of me at the time, in fact, she did say it because she herself is an IPEC trained coach, was that I was a pretty classic level 5. Bold, brave, confident, an innovator, and a change agent. And indeed, that was the very role I had been hired in to perform. And none of that was enough. I adored my coach then, I still do, and she wasn't well versed in shame. So when it started showing up about 3 months prior to when this attack happened, we didn't truly address it. And so it built, and it built, and it eroded my resilience, and it eroded my resilience to the point that when that full-on shaming and bullying attack came, I fell apart, literally and completely. And why I put this photo up there is because, contrary to what you all said, I was having a lot of fun at this time. What this photo also proves to me, why I put it up, is it also proves the power of the shame resilience skills. And there's actually a concept in the community resilience model called post-traumatic growth. and I was in my full experience of it at that point. So let's dive in. To begin with, what exactly is shame? And I'm going to use Brené Brown's definition here, that shame is the intensely painful feeling or experience of believing that we are flawed and therefore unworthy of acceptance and belonging. When you read that, shame sounds a lot like a gremlin, and indeed it is. I actually call it the master gremlin or the uber gremlin, and for several reasons. Shame is the most difficult human emotion that we have. It hollows us out. It feels absolutely hideous. It's a deeply visceral and primal emotion, and it quite literally feels threatening to our survival and triggers our primal survival instincts. And because of that, we will do almost anything not to feel shame. Unchecked shame can lead to drive some downright awful behavior, especially when we try fighting shame with shame. And unchecked shame is also highly correlated with some really awful mental health and physical health outcomes: addiction, depression, abuse, heart disease. And that's just the beginning of the list. Shame is also sticky. What I mean by that is that it makes all the other difficult emotions stick around longer. And shame is stubborn. As I'll explain in a bit, shame is sadly hardwired into our brains. It is part of our biology. So we can never become shame-proof. We can only become shame resilient. And interestingly, for me, this aspect of shame makes it look a lot less like a gremlin, but I still find it much easier and much more helpful to think of shame as the master gremlin. A little bit more about what shame looks like. It tends to drive 3 tapes. The first one is the I'm not good enough tape, which can sound a lot like I'm a failure, I'm a mistake, I'm not smart enough, sensitive enough, successful enough, caring enough, productive enough, etc. And on its flip side, anyone actually remember tapes had a flip side, is the I'm too much tape, which can sound like I'm too confident, too assertive, too bold, too aggressive, or too sensitive, too emotional, too giving, too caring, etc. And the not good enough and the I'm too much tape typically tend to show up whenever we have the judgment that something has gone wrong, or we've received some negative or critical feedback. So that's very much when we can expect shame to show up, when there's a perception that something has gone wrong. But if we manage to work our way through those two and talk ourselves out of listening to their messages, then we get hit with the who do you think you are tape. And actually, just the other day, I was talking with another coach friend here in Ithaca. She is a highly experienced and masterful coach. She's been doing this for, over a decade. And she was sharing just how much and how regularly this tape still shows up for her in her own life. And so we can expect the who do you think you are tape typically shows up whenever we're about to do something brave or bold or authentic or courageous with our lives. I also love, there's another concept here of whenever we're about to step into a space that is energetically bigger than the one that we currently inhabit, that's when shame will often show up. Which begs the question, why on earth do we have shame? What purpose does it serve? And I tend to be a bit of a geek when it comes to evolutionary neurobiology, because I always want to know why. And it was quite interesting for me as a coach learning that that's not the question I need to ask my clients, but for me, myself, and my own learning, I want to know why. And here's what the evolutionary psychologist and compassion researcher Paul Gilbert posits. We evolved to be highly social group living creatures. Our individual survival literally depended on being accepted in a group. And in turn, the group survival depended on our ability to trust each other. So in this scenario, shame evolved then as a way to engender the necessary trust to ensure the group's survival. It evolved as a way for us to trust each other that we would behave in the ways that fostered group harmony. And it evolved a mechanism to inculcate from a very early age the need to adopt appropriate behavior in order to be accepted and to belong. So evolution favored that every single member of the tribe, that we don't see the variation in shame proneness that we see in the variation in guilt, anger, fear, anxiety, depression. What we see is that we are all shame prone in virtually the same way, and that evolution then favored that every single member of the tribe was endowed with the gift, quote unquote, of shame proneness. And it literally hardwired it into our biology. Indeed, what we now know today is that the only people who do not feel shame are sociopaths and psychopaths. Which brings me to Brene Brown's 1, 2, 3 of shame. So beware, as I say, here be dragons. 1, and a lot of you already said this, we all have it. Shame is a universal human emotion. It crosses all cultures, all languages, everywhere in the world. And as I said before, we can never become shame-proof. We can only become shame-resilient. 2, which some of you also already said, no one wants to talk about it. Shame does not want to be named. Our shame is so shaming that we would rather hide it. And 3, the less we talk about it, the more we have it. Shame thrives on secrecy and silence. And shame cannot survive being named. So at this point in the webinar, we're about 10 or 15 minutes in, it would be totally natural for us to be thinking, no way do I want to coach shame. Shame sounds like it needs therapy. And yes, absolutely. In some cases, when the shame is deep and getting in the way of the client's ability to function, absolutely. We know that therapy is in order. But I'll point you right back to what shame is. It's universal. So your clients will have it. So do you. And while we can theorize why shame may have been evolutionarily adaptive then, the reality is now, in our times, shame is not adaptive for our happiness, success, or fulfillment. Shame kills our happiness, erodes our confidence, decreases our resilience, and demoralizes us. In fact, Brene Brown would go so far as to say there is not a shred of empirical evidence that says shame is a good thing for us, other than from an evolutionary basis of making us nice and compliant. That doesn't set us up for happiness. So in short, shame gets in the way of the fulfilling life we are trying to create for ourselves and support our clients in creating for themselves. Also, and this is good news, bad news for us as coaches, shame is on the rise. Researchers are seeing increasing vulnerability to shame injuries across the board. And yes, I will get to why that is a little later in the webinar. But before we go there, we've had some bad news about shame. There is some good news about shame, and here it is. It's highly coachable. Indeed, for the overwhelming majority of normal functioning adults, in other words, our clients, shame responds better to coaching than to therapy. Why? Because therapy often has the unfortunate side effect of pathologizing shame. It's not intentional on the part of the therapist. They are well versed in shame. They know what it is. It's more that shame in the therapy context can quickly become what we see to be wrong with us. However, from a more compassionate view, shame, I would posit, is what is right with us. Shame feels hideous. Yes, absolutely. But it's actually a very innocent emotion, even although it doesn't feel like it, because shame just says we're human beings who care. We want to be loved. We want to matter. We want to belong. Some more good news. In coaching, and I know that we are IPEC coaches, but I also, looked into CTA, and I really love the way they put it. As coaches, we believe our clients are naturally creative, resourceful, and whole. And our job as coaches is to help our clients see that in themselves. So not only does coaching them by definition avoid the whole shame is what is wrong with us trap, but coaching is also very strengths-based and skills and goals-oriented. So with some increased awareness on our side and the knowledge of the shame resilience skills, we're really ideally positioned as coaches to coach our clients and ourselves around shame. The other good news, empathy dissipates 80% of shame. And what are we coaches trained to be? Empathetic. Yeah. That said, I did say 80%. So it doesn't dissipate all of it because shame is stubborn. It will keep on coming back and hijacking and blindsiding us and our clients unless we understand what shame is and develop our shame resilience skills. So I'm just going to go through those, Greg, and then I promise we're taking a pause. So let's go there, shame resilience skills. So Brené Brown lays out 4 shame resilience skills. And so I think of these as like where we tend to armor up against shame, and we'll be getting to the shame shields later. When we try to fight shame, I think of shame resilience skills as the force field. I'm trying to sort of conceptualize the idea of a force field here, which is not armor. It's something that's much more lighter, and we can still let stuff through. We're not shutting everything out. So the first skill is what I've shortened, because I want catchy here so that everyone can get this stuff, to know it. And what I mean by knowing our shame is to recognize when we're in shame and understand what triggered. There are 12 categories of what Brené Brown calls unwanted identities, which her shame research established. And in the interest of time, I'm not going to discuss them further here, but you can find them in her book. I thought it was just me, or just email me and I'll send them to you. Knowing it also means we know our physiological symptoms of shame, what shame actually feels like, what we sense in our body. I don't mean feel, I don't mean emotions, I do mean sensations, what we sense in our body when shame shows up. Because it absolutely has telltale physical symptoms. For me, it very much feels like the gut punch in the stomach, and I notice my whole body contract, and I will often do a sharp intake of breath, and my skin starts to get all tingly and sweaty, and I'll often start to sort of either one of 2 things. The blood will either rush out of my face, or I'll go completely red in the face. For other people, the heart racing, time can seem to slow down. We can get tunnel vision. Our mouths might go dry. Each of us has a different sort of typology of symptoms. And so when we learn to identify our physical symptoms, we learn to do that so that we can recognize shame for what it is when it shows up. And so that we're less blindsided, and we go, oh, this is shame, and then we're better able to address it. Knowing our shame also includes knowing when, how, and with whom we are most likely to armor up and use our shame shields, which, as I said, we'll come to in a bit. The second shame resilience skill is what I call check it. That means we practice critical awareness. Awareness is knowing something exists, Critical awareness is knowing why it exists, how it works, how our society is impacted by it, and who benefits from it. And in the case of shame, make no mistake, the beauty, the diet, the drug industries benefit hugely from our shame. And social media and advertising and marketing messages absolutely will target our shame. And what happens also is that shame then works like a zoom lens on the camera. When we are feeling shame, the camera is zoomed all the way in tight on ourselves, and all we see is our flawed selves, alone and struggling. But when we practice critical awareness, we zoom out and we start to see a completely different picture. We see how many people are in the exact same struggle. We can reality check those shame triggers and all those societal expectations that fuel shame. In short, you guys all know how to do this. This is straight up Gail's coaching. It's all around the assumptions, the interpretations, and the limiting beliefs. The third skill is telling it. We reach out and we tell our story of shame with someone who has deserved the right to hear it. It isn't everybody. The reason why, of course, is that shame cannot survive empathy. As we've said, it thrives on secrecy and silence. So reaching out and telling our story is the single most powerful act of shame resilience we can engage in. And as coaches, if we've done our jobs right, absolutely. We are the person our clients will come to with their shame stories. Even if they don't use the word shame or recognize it as shame, and we'll get to that in the next skill, they will trust us with those shame stories. So, and honor that trust back. And when they bring us, as I said, we know how to be empathetic. So we use our empathy skills to help our clients see how the very experiences that make them feel so alone are actually universal experiences. That all of us fight these hidden, silent battles against not being good enough, not having enough, not belonging enough. When we find the courage to share our experiences and the compassion to hear others tell their stories, we force shame out of hiding and it loosens its control over us. And then the last of the 4 shame resilience skills is name it. By this, I mean we actually use the word shame to describe shame. And we're very mindful about using that word and not guilt and not embarrassment and not humiliation. Because as coaches, we name what is in the room. We call it shame, we explain what it is, and we ask our clients what they connect with there. Very often, don't be surprised if they resist it the first time, because remember, shame doesn't want to be spoken. So in service of our client's agenda, always, we will gently, kindly, compassionately ask them to observe it when it next comes up, because it pretty much always does. And so we create awareness over time. And as we do that, we start to break the silent hold of shame on our clients' lives. Also, when we learn to name shame, we start to notice just incredibly how pervasive it is. And we start to pick up on all the many and varied subtle ways in which shame is used. And it's like, it truly is, it's pervasive, it's everywhere. This is the language that is used not only to shame, but also to defend shaming. And it sounds a lot like, you're so sensitive, you're so defensive, get a thicker skin. It's all in your head. So when we name shame, it helps us and our clients see that behavior for what it is. It tends to shame them into submission, silence, compliance, or whatever. All right, so here's our first pause to see what questions are coming up. Yeah, let's take a pause here.
I have a question, yeah. Go for it.
But if you're ready, you're ready. So yeah, no, I've been here for the whole call, and this is so timely. I'm working with a client who is experiencing great shame. She doesn't know that that's what it's called, and it all comes from very severe early trauma. And I've been working with her and doing actually these things, and just talking and validating her normal human reaction to her horrible experiences. And I am really curious about this because I want to make sure I stay within the coaching realm, and and I am. So you validated that for me, and I can see the power. I am seeing the power in the results so far. My question is, what happens though? I have this underlying concern that at some point we may open something that really needs therapy. I know that there's no healing this without therapy at some point. So I'm treading carefully and checking in. But I feel that she's checking into her mental health benefits and had no idea therapy could even help, because she's so enmeshed in the shame, and so she falls into the same patterns of doing things for people who say, you're so cold, or you're so sensitive, you don't care, and she's a people pleaser as a result. So I guess my question is, where is there something that I really need to watch out for? And should she have a therapist? At what point should she have a therapist set up in place?
Yeah, and such a natural question, because when shame comes up, it's like, exactly, it was like, does this need therapy? Am I okay? Should I be coaching around this? And I really want you, it's like, trust your coaching skills. You absolutely have the right coaching skills. And I realized that if I was starting to hold myself back as a coach because I was scared of maybe treading into some territory, whose agenda was that? I wasn't serving my clients. And so I've really learned to get really comfortable with this. And it's really, everyone develops their own relationship with how comfortable they are going into this place. I'm extremely comfortable with it. I mean, my whole niche butts up extremely closely to therapy, and I'm fine with that. I've made my peace with it. I've worked through all my shame around that. But yeah, it's like we say over and over again, trust your gut, trust your instinct. When you are listening with all those coaching empathetic skills, that is so healing. It is so healing. And truly trust yourself in that. If you holding that space alone is such an incredible gift that you can give to someone, because exactly, so many people will just, I don't want to hear, this is too much. It's like, we don't want to, it's just like, it's so triggering and traumatic in ourselves. Does that answer your question?
It does. This is the most perfectly timed call I have ever been on, I think, and it's
I love serendipity.
Thank you.
And we very much do need to have done our own shame work to do shame work with our clients. It's just like, we can't coach until we've been coached, right? We really need to know our own shame stuff in order to go there with our clients.
Sue, it's so wonderful to hear this. And I'm specifically working with baby boomers. So I think my question is, number one, it's so reassuring to understand how universal and how human it is of us to do this. But it's almost like the way that we isolate ourselves even within the group by being uniquely distinct. So in working with baby boomers and I'm actually wanting to create a whole movement around purpose in our baby boom stage of, third acting here. But I see that the people that are being drawn to me right now are men who are trying to find this fresh purpose, but there's so much shame for them. And for them, it's almost harder to find a place that's safe. And you know, I'm a newer coach, so my own journey with an alcoholic family and different things, I've learned a lot over time. But do I need to be thoughtful? A lot of coaches seem to coach their same gender, and I'm just curious, you know, how that plays out for you, or if stages of life have a lot more shame to go through. That's what I'm the basis
No,
of.
it doesn't surprise me in the least to hear that men are much more willing to open up about their shame to a woman than they are to a man.
Okay.
Unfortunately, it goes back, you know, to the old biases. And,
Yeah.
you know, there's an interesting one of where women will have all sorts of flavors of shame identities, a lot around, can always be around body image, always a top one for women.
Mm-hmm.
For men, the number one shame identity, unwanted shame identity is, can you guess it? Don't be weak.
Oh, sure. That's underneath that, of course. It's just a flavor of that. Mm-hmm.
I mean, men are so socialized, especially that baby boomer generation, around don't be weak. And to be perceived as weak is incredibly shaming. There's some really good stuff, again, in Brene Brown's materials there around, for women, shame feels like a web. For men, shame feels like the small, tiny box, which is just, don't be weak.
Yeah.
Don't step out of this. Don't step off this pedestal. And especially don't step off this pedestal that we, women, put you on, which is be a man. Be the strong man. Women can be terrible shamers of men.
So what was fascinating, this most recent client actually, just as his father died at 92, finally now got so low in reaching out to work with me. For the very first time, he felt like he could be an authentic individual. He felt like he'd never measured up to his father. I mean, this goes on so long, and as we live longer, it feels like it needs to be a universal release for us, to have any sense of satisfaction, you know, as we age.
And pointing people to some of those Brene Brown videos on her two TED Talks on vulnerability and shame are very often great places to start, to where we're going to go next, which is getting clear between the difference between shame and its sort of, and the shame family of emotions. So we've already defined shame. The important thing to add here, that shame is a focus on self. It's an idea of who we are. It's an identity where guilt says, I made a mistake. Shame says, I am a mistake. See the difference? So shame develops very early on. Indeed, it predates language. And this is shocking. Babies as young as 12 to 15 months old can and do experience shame. Shame comes before guilt, way before guilt. Shame's little sister is inadequacy. Oh, am I catching up? Yes, I am catching up. Where shame is a feeling that there is something wrong with us, that we're flawed and worthless, inadequacy is that feeling that we are less than others, that we are inferior in some ways. Subtle, but an important difference. And so I like to think of it as that, while inadequacy may feel like more like a paper cut in comparison to full-on shame, enough of those paper cuts and we're a mess. And make no mistake of it, and this was certainly part of what my experience was, if inadequacy is allowed to accumulate and it's left unchecked, it can easily turn into shame. Then next up, the twin sisters, healthy guilt and unhealthy guilt. The guilt arises when we evaluate ourselves to have fallen short of some standard. So in contrast to shame, which is of who we are, identity, guilt's focus is on our behavior. It's what we did, not who we are. When guilt is healthy, we objectively did something wrong. And I know that, yes, it's one of the, whatever, I pick things that there are no mistakes, there only what have you. But sorry, we murder someone, it kind of is something wrong. And B, our stand, and it's the two-part, we did something wrong, and our standards were rational. That leads to healthy guilt, and it can be a very positive motivator. When we're experiencing healthy guilt, we are much more likely to dance. We're also much more likely to hold ourselves accountable for our own behavior. We're not likely to do that in shame. If guilt is unhealthy, we're either being irrational about labeling our behavior as wrong, like we're late for a meeting and we think, or we shout at our child and we think we're the worst parent ever, or our standards are irrationally high, or it's both. So it's easy to see how close unhealthy guilt and shame are and to confuse them. It's just that the distinction is subtle but important. Guilt is a focus on behavior. Shame is a focus on self. And where shame, as I said, develops really, really, really young, when we're babies, when we don't even have language, the concept of guilt only emerges between the ages of 3 and 6 years old. It comes much later. Remorse is guilt combined with the desire to make amends. Remorse can be an incredibly painful emotion, but it also it can motivate us to make true, authentic behavior change that's driven by internal values, not external blaming or shaming. So remorse can actually also be a very functional and healthy and motivating feeling. And then there's humiliation. The difference between humiliation and shame is that we believe we deserve our shame. We don't believe we deserve our humiliation. One of the best examples I can think of is here. Think of a kid in school and a teacher walks up to a kid and sort of says, I have a paper here that doesn't have a name on it. Oh, guess who that might be? Oh, so-and-so. Why am I so surprised? Now, if that kid receives that as humiliation, they're going to be pissed off, they're going to be angry, and guess what? They're probably going to come home and tell their parent about it. If they receive that as shame, they're going to think they deserve it, and they're going to not tell anyone about it. So we're much more likely to take action to defend ourselves when it's humiliation, or to tell someone about it. So this is such an important distinction, especially in children, because they'll secret keep their shame, but we're much more likely to hear the humiliation. And then there's embarrassment. And embarrassment here is, it's like forgetting somebody's name, being late for a meeting, having a food stain on our clothing. We've all done it. We know it's normal. It's discomforting, yes. It can even feel painful, but it passes fairly quickly. And most of the time, we're able to laugh about it later. If we're not able to laugh about it at some point later, it may not be embarrassment. It may be more like humiliation, and it may an out of proportion response to something. Again, so shame or humiliation. I said we'd get to some neurobiology. So here we go. Biologically speaking, resilience is when our autonomic nervous system is in balance. Say what? Didn't think I was going to go there with coaching, did I? Because I'm a neurobiology geek. I'm not a neurobiologist, but I love this stuff. So every single human on this planet has an autonomic nervous system. It's the system that is responsible for regulating all of our basic bodily functions, our breathing, our heart rate, our digestive system, and all of those basic bodily functions. And it's made up of two parts: the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous systems. Anytime our body senses danger or threat, it activates the sympathetic nervous system. When our body is sensing safety, we're in our parasympathetic nervous system. So we can think of the sympathetic nervous system as like our accelerator, if we were a car. It's our classic fight or flight system. It prepares us for action. When it's engaged, our heart rate goes up, our breathing is shallow and faster, our pupils will actually dilate, we will stop digesting, and a few other things happen. And that can happen even when we're not moving. It's like when you get that shame attack and you feel that, absolutely, you're now in your sympathetic nervous system. Conversely, the parasympathetic nervous system is like our brake. It's our rest and digest and tend and befriend system. When it's active, our bodies are calm and relaxed, and we're connected and engaged with others. These two systems work together to maintain a steady and balanced internal state within the body. The technical term for that is homeostasis. Our bodies naturally cycle backward and forward between both systems throughout the day and even moment by moment. Actually, the moment by moment is the breath in stimulates the sympathetic nervous system, the breath out stimulates the parasympathetic nervous system. Actually, we can literally measure resilience as the difference between how fast our heart is beating on the breath in and how much it slows down on the breath out. It's called heart rate variability. There's actually a biological measurement for resilience. We have periods of activation followed by periods of relaxation. When we are in this smooth flowing rhythm, our nervous system is in balance and we are in our resilience zone. When we're in our resilience zone, we're at our best. We're best able to handle whatever challenge we may be facing. So resilience then is not about how happy or sad we're feeling. Rather, it's the feeling that we are okay, knowing that we are okay with whatever it is that we are feeling. And then here comes shame. Shame bumps us out of our resilience zone. We might be bumped into what we call the high zone, or what we call the low zone. And in the interest of time, I'm not going to go too much into the details of what those look like. But as you look at the slide on the screen, the high zone and the low zone should look very familiar to you when you think about the energy levels. What do you notice about the high zone and the low zone? What does it remind you of in terms of energy levels? Bingo, everybody, bingo. Exactly. The high zone looks a lot like level 2 energy, and the low zone looks a lot like level 1 energy. And this is exactly the pattern I see in my clients' ELIs. That the energy stress charts reactions, the bottom chart, is almost always some combination of they are leading with a 1-2 hit, with the other levels coming in way behind them. So if you want to know your own resilience without doing a heart rate variability assessment, just look at your ELI ESP chart. It's right there. So learning and practicing the skills of resilience does two things. It helps us come back into our resilience zone more quickly when we're bumped out, and it widens our resilience zone so that we're not bumped out of our resilience zones as easily in the first place. So we're just not as reactive. So why does shame bump us out of our resilience zone so much? Why is shame sensed at a deep instinctive level as such a threat to our very survival? And here we go. We need to go a little bit into the brain. How many of you are familiar with the triune brain concept, three-part brain concept? So this is going to be a very light, highly simplified introduction for those of us who aren't familiar. So our brain actually develops from bottom to top, back to front, and inside to out. So if you look here, this is our brain. Firstly, here's our brainstem. This is the oldest part of our brain. It's often called our reptilian or our survival brain. It actually develops in the womb, and it organizes all our basic life-sustaining functions. It's highly responsive to threat throughout our entire lifespan. Our brainstem's function is to keep us alive. We are born with this fully developed. Infants and newborns operate entirely from their brainstem. They're unable to regulate their own nervous systems, and that's exactly why they depend on us so much as caregivers for soothing and safety. Then comes the limbic system. This area processes memory, emotions, the response to stress, and it's responsible for nurturing, caring, separation anxiety, fear, rage, social bonding, and hormone and control. So shame lives here, right in the limbic system. The interesting thing about the limbic system is it's organized mainly during the first 6 years of life, but it continues to evolve in a use-dependent manner throughout our life. So think toddlers and preschoolers. They are totally living from their limbic system. The limbic system is also where our threat detection system, called the amygdala, is located. You can think of the amygdala as like our smoke detector. It sounds the alarm when it senses threat, and it activates the survival brain to take over. And then there's our big cerebral cortex, the defining feature of Homo sapiens. Our cerebral cortex is the home to thought, reason, language, problem solving, planning, attention, self-awareness, among all those other things. It's the last area to be established and matured, and its development continues throughout our mid-20s. In fact, it's not fully mature until our mid-20s. Think teenagers, anyone? Why they are so difficult? Because they do not have a mature prefrontal cortex. Here's the thing. When our smoke detector, the amygdala, sounds the alarm and signals the brainstem, the survival brain, to take over, our big prefrontal cortex, it goes offline. We quite literally flip our lid. At that moment, we have no access to thought, reason, or logic. Our brain's sole focus is on surviving, and we are totally in the brainstem and in the limbic system. So in the community resilience model training, I teach the skills of how we can actually soothe the survival brain when we flip our lids, so that our thinking brain can come back online and we're able to come back into our resilience zone. There's another really important thing about the amygdala. It stores memories of threat and generalizes them into templates so that it can very quickly, as in nanoseconds, sound the alarm if a similar looking threat comes along. And we have two types of memory: explicit memory and implicit memory. Explicit memory is the stuff that we know that we know. It's the conscious retention of information like facts and events. These memories have a sense of self, a sense of time, and they have language. So if you think of when you learned how to drive a car, for instance, you can picture yourself in the car, where you were, who you were with, what age you were. Maybe you even remember what type of car it was. That's explicit memory. Explicit memories start to develop between the ages of 18 to 24 months. Indeed, we need to have explicit memory in order to have a sense of guilt. Not so shame, because shame triggers implicit memory. Implicit memory is body memory. It's the stuff we know, but we don't even know that we know it or know how we know it. Implicit memory doesn't have a sense of time. It doesn't need language. It develops before birth, and it can be triggered out of the blue. Coming back to driving a car, do you actually have to think of how to drive a car anymore? Exactly. No, you just do it. That's an example of implicit memory. And have you ever smelled something that has just transported you back to another time or place? That's implicit memory. Indeed, smell is actually one of our strongest triggers of implicit memory because of how smell is wired in our brain. It actually bypasses some parts of the brain. It's very fascinating. But coming closer to home, shame triggers implicit memory because it can trigger deep body memories formed while we were still infant and toddlers. Remember I said shame comes before guilt, and we can form it as early as the age of 12 to 15 months. That's a time when we are completely reliant on our caregivers to meet all our needs. And often, in those moments when we have an angry or an inattentive parent, in those moments when our caregivers are not available to us physically or emotionally, for our babies who are living in their brainstem and their limbic system, they receive that as that somehow they are not worthy of love and belonging. That we didn't matter enough to our caregivers to get our caregivers' attention, and therefore there must be something wrong with us. This doesn't mean our parents or primary caregivers were bad people or abusive or any of that stuff. We can come from incredibly loving and caring families and still carry these deep shame injuries with us, because our parents and caregivers are human and therefore imperfect. And because babies and toddlers, let's be frank, they are relentless in their neediness, as a parent among us knows. And so moments of inattention are just going to happen. And whereas before, in the past, when we were living in those tribes, when we were being raised in the village, and there were lots of other caring adults around to pick up the slack when our primary caregivers needed a break, now that buffer is gone, going, gone. Combine that with our hard wiring for shame proneness, and there you have why researchers are seeing such a steady increase in our vulnerability to shame. Because now, as infants and toddlers, we are reliant on such a small subset of primary caregivers. Also combine it with the fact that we're born with implicit memory, an amygdala that creates templates out of highly charged emotions. Hello, baby, I don't know that I'm really belonging. And our bodies are set up to be exquisitely responsive to shame from an early age. So when later as adults we get triggered into shame, this is why our supercharged reactivity can feel like it's come completely out of the blue. We have no memory of why we could feel this way. And the intensity of our shame reactions totally blindsides us. It's all because of implicit memory. And implicit memory that we didn't even know we had. It's been triggered. And when it is, it throws us right back into our infant sense of utter panic that we may not survive if we're not loved and held and soothed right now. And no, all of this doesn't mean that we need therapy. Therapy doesn't hurt. I have my own therapist, love her, adore her, and I absolutely carry on seeing her. What it means is that we all need empathy and support and kindness and compassion. In short, we all need coaching. Okay, so that was the most intense parts of today's webinar. Let's take a pause here and see where we're at. Alrighty, so let's lighten it up a bit as we bring it to an end and take a look at shame and the 7 energy levels. So at this point, you have a decent grasp of what shame is. So let's hear your thoughts. What does shame look and sound like in level 1? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So shame in level 1 looks a lot like shame at feeling so stuck, shame at feeling helpless, shame at being the victim, shame at how overwhelmed and powerless we might feel. Okay, I gave you a clue. What is shame in level 2? How might shame in level 2 look and feel? What kinds of things might you see or hear people saying? Shame in level 2 can look a lot like at how much conflict, anger, or resentment we seem to harbor. We can have a lot of shame around the broken relationships that come with a lot of dominant level 2s, how little we seem to trust people, how much we hold on to grudges and resentment. Shame in level 3, this is a super interesting one to me, because on the surface, dominant level 3s would seem to be quite shame resilient. But when I've been digging deeper with my clients, when I see what's really going on, which is not, it's actually, classic level 3 as well, is a whole lot of avoidance and rationalizing. They're not really engaging with shame. They're just papering over it, saying they're okay, but inside they're really not believing that or feeling that. Shame in level 4, someone said it earlier. What does shame in level 4 look like? Yeah, absolutely. It's the people pleasing and appeasing. It's one I'm getting really curious about, because the pattern I'm starting to see is that for many who are leading level 4s, there might be, again, I'm curious, I don't know, but there might be, and I probe around it, there might be a shame-based need to people please that is driving some of their thinking and behavior. So it can look like genuine caring and compassion and concern, but where it isn't supported by a level 5 or 6 also being in their top 3 in the ELI, then they are probably highly prone to seeing taking care of themselves or setting boundaries as being selfish and something they are ashamed to do. And if they ever feel like they haven't given enough of themselves, been caring enough or kind enough, wow, they can really go through quite the shame storm. I have a client who's right there at this moment. Level 4s can also be really easily shamed about how much they are giving. They're often seen and told that they're too sensitive, too emotional, and too caring. And level 5, again, on the surface, level 5s seem to be highly shame resilient, but they frequently aren't nearly as shame resilient as you might think. But their shame can be around not achieving enough, not driving enough of their ideas into action, or being seen as being arrogant, distant, disconnected, hard driving. And because level 5s don't tend to do emotion as readily as level 4s or 6s, they can actually be extra specially blindsided by shame when it shows up. And in level 6s again will seem to be quite shame resilient, but watch their energy stress reactions. If they're leading in their energy stress reactions with a 1 or 2, they're not truly resilient. Rather, and I love Bob Heenan's phrase here, they're likely using the level 6 as an escape into the den of Zen. Sorry. And so for these level 6s, shame may look and sound like being the too much tape, the too creative, too intuitive, too woo-woo, not grounded enough. They might often be told to grow up or get real. And then level 7. Of course, we could say that level 7's shame doesn't exist. We'll come back to this, because actually level 7 has a very important role to play in shame resilience, and we're going to end there. So we're almost there, folks. 2 things. We're going to do shame shields, and then we're going to do self-esteem and self-compassion. So the concept here is simple. We hate shame so much that we will do almost anything to avoid feeling it and sitting with it. So we use shame shields, and there are 4 of them. For those of you who are Brene Brown knows, she talks about 3 of them. I talk about 4 of them. And we're all capable of using all of them. But we typically have pattern ways of using them, where we might use one more with one set of people and in one particular context, and different ones with different people and context. So firstly, there's the moving away shame shield. Here we withdraw, we hide out, we secret keep. Remind us of anything? Yeah, level 1. The moving away shame shield is a very level 1 stress response. Remember what I also said about our nervous system? The moving away shame shield is also one of our basic survival responses. It's our flight response. It's born out of our amygdala, triggering the alarm and the activation of our sympathetic nervous system. We're bumped into our low zone here. And we tend to use this shield with those we most want to avoid conflict with. And I see a lot of that as well in my shame-prone clients. You know, they're very much conflict avoiders. Then there's the moving against shield, ringing some bells. Yeah, probably level 2. Yeah, it's a classic level 2 response. Here we're trying to gain power over others. Here we come out swinging. We use shame, blame, and aggression to fight shame. And it's our fight stress response, where that amygdala is bumping us into the high zone. This is the shield, unfortunately, we often use against those who are closest to us. Unfortunately, we often use this one there. And then there's the moving towards shame shield. We start to appease and people please. It looks like level 4. Because here, instead of our sympathetic nervous system leading, this is our tendon befriend stress response. It's coming from our parasympathetic nervous system. This is the shield we will typically use against someone who has more power than us. Think bosses, you know, young kids to young kids to parents, kids to teachers. Teenagers, they're just as likely to use the move against or move away shame shield on us. There is also the freeze response. And I'm not going to go into too much detail about that here because it requires some more understanding about the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. But the freeze response is actually by far and away the most activated of our stress response. Basically, our foot is hard on the accelerator and the brake at the same time. And so while it looks like we're completely sort of like, okay, like frozen or numb, internally, our nervous system is actually at its most dysregulated, even if it doesn't look that way on the outside. Freeze responses are very common around big trauma, and when that is the case, it'll almost always need therapy to resolve. For the rest of us, freezing, we can all experience moments of freezing. We don't tend to get us stuck there. Freezing itself can feel incredibly shaming. We didn't do anything. We just let it happen. We're useless. We deserve it. No. We couldn't do anything because our nervous system was so dysregulated that we had no ability to do anything. Okay, stretch now. A common misconception is that good self-esteem is a protective factor against shame, but it isn't, because in order to have high self-esteem, we need to feel special and above average. In other words, self-esteem is external. It depends on the opinions of others and how we compare others to ourselves. Also, self-esteem is highly contingent on success. We only tend to have it when things are going well, and that when we fail, self-esteem deserts us. Self-esteem can also drive some really problematic behaviors because we have a constant need for validation and approval. We're puffing ourselves up and putting others down so that we can feel good in comparison. And continuing to feed our need for positive self-evaluation is a bit like stuffing ourselves with candy. We can get a brief sugar high, and then we get the crash. And right after the crash comes the pendulum swing to despair as we realize that however much we'd like to, we can't always blame our problems on someone else. We can't always feel special and above average. And so the result is often devastating. And then we are incredibly hard on ourselves. We totally beat up on ourselves. And we go to the I'm not good enough, I'm worthless. So we pendulate from this self-esteem to deep shame. So if self-esteem isn't the answer, what is? Well, we talked about the 4 shame resilience skills of Brené Brown. There's one more: self-compassion. Because if shame is the master gremlin, for me, self-compassion is the master resilience skill. Because with self-compassion, we stop judging and evaluating ourselves altogether. We stop trying to label ourselves as good or bad and simply accept ourselves with an open heart. If that reminds you of a level, yeah, It sounds a lot like level 7. And what I like so much about self-compassion is that so often level 7 seems so abstract and unattainable, but self-compassion, the amazing thing about it, it's actually a set of truly robust practices, which any of us can learn. It's a set of practices, it's skills. And here I draw on the amazing work of Kristen Neff and Chris Germer, and that there are 3 components to self-compassion. There's self-kindness. The idea here is that where shame feels blameworthy, but as I've previously said, it's actually innocent. So with self-kindness, we honor and acknowledge our need and desire to be loved, to be worthy, and to belong. And then with mindfulness, where shame feels permanent, with mindful self-compassion, we see that shame is a temporary state that affects just part of who we are. It doesn't define who we are. It doesn't make us unworthy. And common humanity, where shame feels so isolating that we're alone, that we're the only person who could be feeling like this. With common humanity, we see that shame is exactly what connects us to the rest of the humanity. To be human is to feel shame. It's that universal human emotion. So I've just touched on what self-compassion is. Behind these principles, there's a whole set of specific practices and exercises that we can learn and practice to develop our self-compassion skills. I teach that in a 3-hour workshop, so obviously I'm not going there now. And again, it's like in comparison to self-esteem, self-compassion just changes our whole relationship to failure and difficulty. And where self-esteem is so contingent and dependent on our success and deserts us at the time we need it most, when we're feeling failure or when we're feeling difficult emotions, that's exactly when self-compassion is there for us. Self-compassion is there for us not just in the good times, it's there for us in the bad times. Alrighty, so I'll leave you with that level 7 challenge. I invite you to explore the territory that is beyond shame and worth, beyond good or bad, indeed beyond any judgment or evaluation of yourself at all. I invite you to explore the space of being fully present in the moment, completely perfect in your exact imperfections, and just being. And in being, completely connected with all that is. Because a moment of self-compassion can change your entire day. String enough of those moments together, you change the course of your entire life. Thank you, everybody. I invite you to connect with me if you're interested in exploring this more or diving deeper. I was like, if there was enough interest and we could possibly even pull together a small group coaching program, because I am totally confident that with our level of training, that it'll only take a few sessions to really, along with structured practices and worksheets, to really develop our shame resilience skills. And so doing, increase our happiness, confidence, resilience, and success.
Awesome. Sue, before we jump into questions, I just want to thank you. First of all, you did a great job. The topic was spot on. And as a participant in the Helping Hand yourself, I love that you're giving back to our community. So thanks for stepping up to the plate and offering this training for us. I appreciate your time for doing that. Yeah, so Sue's contact information is right here at the bottom of the slide. If you want to reach out to her, you can also use the Helping Hand forum. If you're a member of the private Facebook group that we have, you can also feel free to use that forum to reach out to Sue as well. Any way you can get a hold of her, I know a lot of you are interested.
Yeah, I'm totally happy to connect one-on-one with people as well. I want to make sure you get your questions answered.